Hey everyone, so I want to introduce a very special guest to the show today, Tom Greever. I first came across Tom a few months ago for the first time during a design leadership and management course I took as part of my master's program at Bentley University. I ended up doing a video report on his book, Articulating Design Decisions, and found a lot of tips in his book extremely valuable, especially because I resonated with a lot of the pain points and struggles that he highlighted. Over the course of Tom's career, he's spoken at many high-profile events and conferences, led several product and design teams across the US, and is a thought leader in the space when it comes to helping designers work better with other stakeholders and really getting organizational buy-in for their designs. So Tom, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. Can you tell me a little bit about your background? I know you came out of college with a marketing degree, but definitely I'm interested to hear a little more about how you shifted more into design and the development side of things.
I went to school for marketing. So I have a bachelor's of business degree. And in college, I kind of taught myself how to use design tools. And it was primarily focused on graphic design at the time. And, the web was still pretty new. And I learned a little bit of, kind of HTML and CSS. But I very quickly in college realized kind of how valuable design was as a skill and a kind of as a part of marketing and advertising and businesses. And so because I kind of knew how to use software and had a little bit of a penchant for doing that sort of thing, I was always doing design for, class projects or like the local band that needed a poster for a show or whatever. And so I kind of just got into it while I was in college and did freelance work and even had kind of a part-time job as a graphic designer, so that by the time I graduated, I actually had a small portfolio of design work, and I went to work in the business industry, but as a creative manager at the time is what my title was. And I oversaw a small team of designers inside a company. But the company, one of my very first projects at that company was to help them transition what was like a old like green screen like terminal based style piece of software that they leased to their customers, this big clunky like expensive thing, and they were going to move it to the web. And it was kind of this new thing. Oh wow, we could just repurpose this and put it online. Won't that be great? Right. So that was one of the projects that I participated in during my tenure there. And I fell in love with the prospect of designing software, and specifically software online. Of course, this was before, mobile apps were a thing even, but I've just kind of always worked in that niche ever since.
That's great. It seems like you've picked up a lot of relevant experience during your first few jobs, and were even able to pick up some of the development side of things as well, which I guess kind of leads you into today with that intersection and being able to work well with other stakeholders as a designer. And I think it's interesting that you came out of college with that marketing degree. And for a lot of designers transitioning into the industry today, I would say that there are a lot of designers coming from a marketing or a business background. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that overlap between marketing and design, and what skills you think you took out of your college program that still are relevant to what you do today.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of overlap, and there was a lot of relevant stuff from my formal education as that helped me a lot in my career. Marketing and advertising is very much of kind of a data-driven industry. And even though there's a certain amount of subjectivity that goes into, say, creating a brand, right, or an ad campaign, fundamentally, marketers and advertisers understand the emotion that's needed to drive behavior for consumers, right? And so it's a lot of the same thinking that's just simply applied to, the design of products and services and websites and apps, right? And so a lot of that, that thinking was very relevant. I also found it to be really valuable that because I had a business degree, I had taken courses like business finance, I took a copyright law class when I was in school. So there were a lot of like business facing classes that I wouldn't have been able to take if I had been focused on design, that I think really benefited me in conversations with stakeholders and people in the business, because I already kind of understood, revenue models and, how business plans worked and those kinds of things. And so it was definitely, very, very valuable for me in that regard. I don't know, and I think it's important to remember, and especially if we're thinking a little bit about like junior level people who maybe don't have a lot of experience in the industry. Um, I think it's important to remember that part of your role in your career is to try stuff, right? It's to figure out where that intersection is for you of both your interest and your skill level. And most people are going to have more than one interest and they're going to have more than one skill, right? And figuring out that confluence of different disciplines and different industries or focus areas, right, is ultimately where you hope to be with your career. And so there's almost not a wrong way to do it. I would not want anyone to think that they've got to leave college and like go immediately into like the perfect design job and then that's where they're going to spend the next 40 years. That actually sounds really terrible when you say it that way, right? But I think my career has actually been pretty circuitous. Like I spent, and you probably wouldn't necessarily see this in my profile. I spent 4 years in China. My wife and I moved to China. We had our first child there halfway through. And so our first child spent the first 2 years of her life in China. And we were doing a combination of things. My wife was teaching at a university. I was teaching part-time at the same university, but I was also building digital products for the nonprofit organization that we were working with, right? And so and I was kind of a team of one during that time. And there have been times in my career where I've looked back on that period of time and thought, man, did I really just like waste my time? I could have been in some corporate job behind a desk working my way up the corporate ladder. But during that 4-year stint in China, I actually got a master's degree in cross-cultural communication from a university in the United States. And I'll tell you, that has been invaluable for me in my career as well, in a way that I didn't even anticipate. I did it because of the partnership between our nonprofit and this university, and it was cheaper for me to do it that way. It was kind of built in. We got to do projects like while we were in Asia and stuff like that. So it's a really cool program, but I didn't realize the extent to which, kind of anthropology and understanding human behavior and cross-cultural situations and communication, I didn't really even anticipate how valuable it was going to be till it was done, right? And then I went back into the workforce in the United States and started applying all this stuff that I've learned. So with that context, you can probably sort of see how I started out with a business degree in marketing and advertising, but I was a designer, continued to be a designer, got a master's degree in communication. It sort of makes sense that I put together this body of knowledge around communicating inside businesses, right? But it wasn't something I set out to do. It was a matter of experimenting with finding the areas of skill that I have and how they overlap with my areas of interest and saying yes to opportunities as they came along.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. When it comes to design, the field is so interdisciplinary that people are coming from different fields. So you have the opportunity to pursue different experiences, and I think those experiences do really make you a stronger designer because you're able to see different viewpoints. And then not only see different viewpoints, but also bring different pieces of knowledge to the table. And going back to what you said earlier about understanding the business side of things and being able to understand how to collaborate with people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, from different departments, I think all of that leads into the culmination of your book, which was published almost 5 years ago at this point, Articulating Design Decisions, which really has a focus on helping designers communicate with other stakeholders and get buy-in for their ideas in that process when they're trying to help out or work with people from different disciplines. So with that, I'm curious to hear a little more about how you came up with the idea for that book.
Yeah, so the way that the book started, I had been working as in a design leadership role for a while through a consulting company that I was a partner in, and I was asked by some local leaders near where I live in the United States to submit a talk for a conference that they were doing, and I submitted 3 abstracts, 3 ideas for that conference. The first 2, they were something like designy or process cool that I thought was interesting that our team was working on. And the third one was called Articulating Design Decisions. And that one just kind of came to me. It was sort of random, but of the 3, it was my least favorite because it just seemed so obvious. It just seemed so mundane and like everyday. It was like, well, of course, everybody has to explain their design decisions to other people. That doesn't seem like something that would be an interesting conference topic. Well, naturally, that's the one that they chose. And so now I was tasked with like coming up with some real tangible like ways that people could improve at articulating their own design decisions. So I started looking back on my career from some of my very early experiences and realizing and recognizing, no, there were people I worked with who were not as good at getting their work approved. And it wasn't that they weren't good designers, right? It was simply that they weren't astute enough to work with people in a way that appealed to their needs, right? They weren't good at presenting their work in a way that would make sense to someone else. And so that process of kind of looking back on my career, thinking about how I do it myself, and then trying to like boil that down into some simple ideas and tactics that people could actually do for themselves and in their own work, resulted in that conference talk. And I did that talk, and the response was, I felt overwhelmed by it. Like, people were coming up to me afterwards and like, oh my gosh, you put something in words that I've been thinking for a long time, or that, that was a great idea. I couldn't even leave the stage area for the next speaker to come up on stage because I was so crowded by people. So there, at that conference, there was another person in the audience who runs another conference. They appreciated the talk. They asked me to present the same talk at their conference. And so I did that a few months later, and it was a similar kind of response, right? Lots of people coming up to me afterwards and talking to me and asking me questions. And O'Reilly, who's my publisher, they were a sponsor of that second conference. And so my editor was in the audience when I gave that talk, and they approached me afterwards and asked me if I would consider expanding this and turning it into a book, which, as you noted, I did 5 years ago. It was originally released in 2015, and the second edition of the book will be out any day now.
That's really exciting. I had no clue there was a second edition in the works, but it's really cool to hear that you were working on another version. And I think design itself has been moving so fast, you've probably come up with a lot more insights and thoughts around that collaboration and that relationship between designers and other people, and being able to justify your designs and really get buy-in for the things that you're building. So a lot of the soft skills that designers have are just as important as their ability to actually do the work. And I think that's a piece that a lot of designers and people kind of forgo, because some people can be a little arrogant and they can think that their designs are the best and that the designs themselves can speak for the work that they do. But ultimately, I think there is a lot of important small nuances and details that you really have to think about and consider, which you highlight in your book.
When I wrote the book 5 years ago, in a similar way, when I gave the first conference talk, I didn't really anticipate the response. It felt like a great opportunity for me to kind of share some ideas with some other people, and I did it. Right. Same with the book. I said yes to that opportunity because I thought, yeah, sure, what's it going to hurt? I sort of always expected that, it would go out there and it would live its life, and people would be like, oh, that was a nice book, Tom, thanks. And it would just kind of like fade into obscurity. But it's actually kind of increased over those 5 years. And that's why we did the second edition, because we recognized that, okay, this has some staying power. This is so important that people are continuing to ask about it and to pursue it and want more details and more ideas. And so it felt like it was the right time to go through and update some of the examples and maybe remove some stuff that didn't feel as relevant anymore, and to add new stuff that I've learned, because over the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of meeting with people, all over the world, leading teams and workshops and speaking at other conferences and talking to people in other teams. And the feedback that I've gotten and the knowledge sharing that has happened like as a result of that has been invaluable. And I'm super grateful to have had the opportunity.
That's great to hear. Yeah, no, I think the book has done wonders for me in my own personal design journey. And I guess what I've seen over the past few years is that designers want a seat at the table. That's kind of like the big phrase that you hear a lot across the industry. And I think a lot of the insights that you share in your book really do help designers to have a little more influence in the workplace and be able to be a little more respected with their role and with the knowledge that they have, the influence that they're able to cultivate as they talk to other people, and then being able to justify some of those ideas. So I think there's one part of the book that I find really fascinating, and in particular, it's this piece around being able to empathize and work with different stakeholders and really bridging that communication gap between design and other functions in a business. So in the industry now, I'm seeing more of these hybrid design and development jobs, and in particular, I'm thinking, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about this particular relationship and whether designers should learn more about the technical side of things to bridge that gap or bridge that communication gap, or whether it should be the other way around, where you have developers that are learning more about the language of design. So I definitely want to get your take on that.
It's absolutely valuable for people to learn new skills, learn new perspectives. If you're a designer and you've never written a line of code before, you should, right? You should find a project. It's a new skill and kind of perspective for you to learn, and it will benefit you even if you don't build a career out of it, right? Anything that you can do to kind of understand the perspective of the different people on your team, or to understand kind of the limits and capabilities of the technology that you're working with, I think is incredibly valuable. So I'm a learner. I love to learn new things, and I'm always interested in kind of understanding more about how the technologies work that I'm using to create a UI on top of. Whether or not all designers should code and be proficient at code or be developers, I think is a different debate. I think that I personally think that understanding and being able to write production quality HTML and CSS is pretty important as a designer, especially working on web applications and websites. HTML and CSS is a presentation layer. It's not actually like programming. There's almost no logic in it at all. It's literally like this block defines this thing and it looks a certain way, and you can change the way that it looks. And so I personally value designers on my team who are able to contribute at that level, because it's so much more efficient. Designers have a stronger sense of every rounded corner and every pixel, right? Developers tend to not be as wary of those details, right? And so if developers are only ever kind of writing presentational layers on our web applications, then there's a conversation that has to take place there where it's like you're sending emails to tell someone to add 3 pixels of padding on a button, right? And so there's enormous efficiencies to designers being able to submit a pull request to the repository that adds that themselves, right? It tends to create a much better looking, more true to the original design result than if the designers are just kind of like throwing mock-ups over the wall and hoping that the developers implement it right, and then having to talk them through that. So I personally actually have seen a lot more specialization in the industry than I have seen hybrid roles. I think hybrid roles probably a little bit more common on smaller teams and smaller companies that don't necessarily have a ton of resources, so they sort of need someone that can do a little bit of everything. But on larger teams and at larger companies, I'm seeing a lot more specialization now that didn't used to be there. There was a time, and the pendulum swings. It's kind of always back and forth. But there was a time not too long ago when it seemed like everyone was just a UX designer. And now, we're going back toward the time of like delineating a lot more between, the people who are doing research and content and interaction design and UX and interface design and all of that. So I'm sure it'll swing back again at some point, but those are definitely trends that I kind of see industry-wide.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the industry trying to better define all of the different facets of what UX is. And in the past, and even to this day, where there's a lot of companies that are looking for a UX designer that can really do it all. So in the job descriptions for some of these jobs, I'll see employers looking for a junior designer with at least 3 to 5 years of experience that can code and also work on visual interfaces and also do the research. And I think the fragmentation is good in some ways, because it helps designers hone into an individual part of the process and get good at it and really know what they're responsible for, as opposed to some of these companies, the smaller companies that you're saying that are more generalists and are looking for these mega designers or unicorns that know a bit about everything. But I definitely think your input there is valuable, being able to at least learn the technical side of things as a designer or even if you're a developer, learning more about the design side of things so that you're able to communicate better and really facilitate that interaction between the two different roles, and then being able to reduce a lot of that frustration and just be able to get quicker buy-in. I would say you would get more people on your side when you're advocating for your designs as well. So I think that's a really valuable aspect of what you just said.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with being kind of a jack of all trades and even pursuing a role that would give you exposure to not only design but also research and also development. I think that's a great opportunity, especially in a younger audience, like a kind of a junior level designer. I think it's a great way to set you up for success in the future. I mean, that's sort of where I started. When I started, we didn't call anything UX. It was just, we were designers, and we were graphic designers really. And to a certain extent, we were web designers, but we didn't know anything about what we were doing. We were just making it up, right? But it was a great place to be because I could learn all the things that I needed to learn that now have served me really well in leadership roles, because I can hold my own when talking to development and engineering teams, right? And I wouldn't be able to do that if I had a career that was exclusively focused on just design or UI per se. There's a really interesting book that came out recently called Range, and I don't know if you've heard of it or not. It's by David Epstein, but it tackles this sort of cultural myth that specialization is like the key to success, and you think of like kind of the Tiger Woods example, like dude was like golfing when he was 3 years old, and his parents were hyper focused on making sure he was really good at golfing. And there's tons of examples in the book about these like hyper specialized kids who grew up to become the best in the world kind of at their thing. But then he also makes a case, and this is sort of the point of the book, that there's far more people who have had successful careers and have become the best in their field. And you look at their path for getting there, and they were all over the place. People that played 5 different sports before they ended up being the best in the world in their sport, right? People that tried all different kinds of stuff, and that breadth of experience is ultimately what set them up for that success, and that they wouldn't have necessarily had that success if they'd just gone straight to the thing that that they would end up being an expert in. So it's a really good read.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a really good segue into this next question I have. For junior designers, there's just so much to explore, and even for designers who have been working for 10 to 20 years, there's always new tools, new things to learn. And I guess for junior designers and for anyone who's in the job hunt right now, or really looking to find their next role, I want to hear a little bit about your experience and your thoughts on hiring, because you're coming from a management perspective and you have that lens. So you've probably seen a lot of different portfolios and resumes over the years as well. And I guess for these junior designers or people who are looking to get that first job in the design industry, which is very broad, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts around what you look for in portfolios, or what do you think some of the challenges juniors are facing are, and what you think they can do to address some of that.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of like interviewing and looking at portfolios, I'm typically looking for people that are learners, that are thinking about design outside of their little bubble of kind of the way that it looks, or to a certain extent even kind of the way that it works. Like I want people who aren't afraid to experiment, who, if I threw a problem at them and they had no idea how to do it, that's not going to scare them, right? That they would see the opportunity in that challenge, right? And so I'm always kind of like trying to probe and understand, like, how do people think about solving problems? And I say this in my book, but like one of the questions I always ask people is, how do you know if a design is good? What makes a good design good? And the way that people answer that question tells me a lot about how they think about design. And most people will speak to kind of like the aesthetic, or negative space, or they'll use some terminology that maybe they learned in art school. But fundamentally, for UX and for business, like, a design has to solve a problem. And so any answer that is more geared toward like solving that problem, and it could just be an aesthetic problem. But hopefully it's also maybe a problem for the business or a customer, right? Any language that you can form around that, I think is really useful. And then in terms of looking at like portfolios and having people talk through work, like I want to understand how you think, right? I don't care as much about the outputs as I care about the outcomes. And maybe if you weren't able to participate in the outcomes, maybe you weren't there long enough to actually see the metrics change. Great. Well, then tell me what you learned, right? I think too often, junior designers kind of have an unnecessary focus on kind of the visual and the assets that they created. But the assets are not even the most important part of it. What's important is what came out of that. What did either the business value that you created, the value for the customer or the business, what was that value that you created? Even if it's not a number, even if you can't attach like a dollar amount, my company got X number of revenue. It doesn't even have to be that. But what is the value that you provided by creating this part of the project? And even if you don't even have that, what did you learn from it? What would you have done differently? What mistakes did you make, right? Talk through that. I think it's a sign of maturity when you can look back on something that you've done and express what you wish you would have done differently so that you can be better going forward. And those are some of the things that I look for.
Yeah, that's all really, really good advice. And I think for a lot of junior designers, either coming out of a design school or even a boot camp, those are really big nowadays. They focus a lot on process, and you'll realize that as a junior designer coming into the industry, there's no one process that solves everything. There are frameworks that you can maybe follow or help guide you, but ultimately every problem that you're going to face in the workplace or every problem that you're going to encounter is going to be different in some way, with different constraints and different requirements, working with different people, and being able to solve the problem and address it from a different perspective is a really good takeaway, because those learnings that you're gathering from these different opportunities and problems that you're solving, you'll be able to bring them into future problems that you encounter moving forward. And that's really how you learn and grow as a designer. Right. So there's a lot of good advice that you just shared there.
Well, and I think to your point about process and perhaps a school's focus on process, there's nothing wrong with having a well-defined, understanding of how UX or product design should work inside an organization. But as you noted, there's not one solution for everyone, right? And so any job you're interviewing for, that hiring manager or that team, they already have some sort of a process, right? And so you should absolutely have an opinion and some ideas about what process you think is going to work. But really, you also need to be smart enough to be flexible and adaptable, because if you walk into any role and you're like, no, my way or the highway, this is what I learned in school, this is the way it has to be, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well at all. And so I think being able to understand how process is a tool for us, but it's just a means to an end, right? And we have to be able to have a flexible tool set to use depending on the environment. And anything you can do to speak to that and to kind of demonstrate that, I think is super important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So I do want to shift gears a bit. We're coming up towards the end of our call here, but I do want to ask you about a new book that you have in the works. I don't want to give too much away, but why don't you share with our audience what you're up to nowadays?
Sure. So, when everything started shutting down because of the pandemic, and I had a bunch of events and things scheduled and planned that also got, shut down, and we're all kind of stuck at home, not sure what to do. I noticed on social media that, a lot of people in the design industry, were trying to help, right? Everyone's like, we're all in this together. People are getting laid off. We'll do free portfolio reviews. Other people were putting together lists of all the people who had lost their jobs or internships, right? People were doing one-on-ones and virtual coffees just for fun because we were all kind of stuck at home and needed to build a sense of community. And so I started asking myself, well, how could I contribute to that? What could I do to also to contribute to this sense of community and bring people together around a topic? And I had already been working on the second edition of Articulating Design Decisions, and O'Reilly had asked me if I would consider writing another book as well. But I would always tell them, well, I don't have anything to write about. If I had something of value to write about, I would absolutely do it. But I don't know what that is. And so kind of as those two things are kind of commingling in my mind, I thought to myself, everyone is at home right now trying to figure out how they can come together as a community. maybe we can write a community book. Maybe that's what we need to do. And I know from my own experience of sharing my book with other people and doing workshops at companies, there are so many smart people out there doing some really great work that you will never hear from because they just simply don't have time. They're so good at their jobs and they're so busy delivering value for their organizations that they don't have time to write a book or put together a conference talk or be on a podcast. And I thought, I want to give voice to some people that maybe we've never heard from before. And so the book that I'm working on for O'Reilly is called 97 Things That Every UX Designer Should Know. And every single one of the 97 things is going to be written by a different expert in our industry, specifically people who are practitioners, people who are leaders, people who are working in the industry. They're attempting to answer the question, if I'm a UX designer, what should I know? And those little short, phrases and answers are going to become the chapters for this book. And actually, everyone is working on it right now. Today happens to be one of our deadlines, and I've been getting a lot of the submissions in today, and it's exciting to see all these people come together and write these articles and these chapters that will be put together in this book. And I think it's going to be a gold mine of knowledge where you'll get to hear from so many different people. And while it's not really about the brand name, right? We've got people from Google and Porsche, and Apple, Wells Fargo, Samsung. We've got people from all over the industry that are contributing to this book. And I can't wait to see it and see it in my hands.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it as well. And during this time, I think that sense of community is in a way lost. But I think what you're trying to do here with this book is really try to bring together different designers, different perspectives, and be able to share some of the advice in a time of need. So super valuable. I'm definitely looking forward to hearing and seeing all of that as well. And we'll definitely put that in the description box below once it's out. So I'm going to wrap up this call. Is there anything else that you want to share with the design community, or if people want to connect with you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the only Tom Greever. So if you just Google my name, you can find me, through my website at tomgreever.com. I'm also active on Twitter and LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me, send me a connect request. I do enjoy hearing from people that have, read the book or gotten some value. And especially if you can tell me like a story of you kind of tangibly putting something into action and how it worked, or even how it didn't work for you. I'm kind of constantly working with lots of other people and having these conversations, and it's a real pleasure for me. So don't be afraid to reach out and say hello. I love hearing from people.
That's great. And we'll drop all of your links down below in the description box, as well as the link to your 2 books, Articulating Design Decisions, as well as your new book, 97 Things Every UX Designer Should Know. But Tom, really appreciate the time you gave us today, and we're looking forward to catching up with you in a few months.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you guys want to see more videos like this, click the subscribe button and drop a like. You can also click the bell icon to get notified when I release new videos. With that, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.